Okay, so now we do this one more time. That was a great practice run. I'm so sorry for that. I was muted. It happens, but I guess you couldn't hear me, but I was apologizing in advance for any technical difficulties. So we're going to start again. Thank you all for hanging in there. Hello and welcome to yet another online edition of Product Crunch. My name is Maya and I'm Marketing and Communications Manager at Goodpatch. I am not the IT manager for good reason. But it brings me great pleasure to host this from my living room here in Berlin. I hope you're all doing well in your own respective home offices. If you know anything about Product Crunch, you know that it's powered by Goodpatch. We're an independent design company that builds digital products, connected apps, all with the human-centered design approach. We're headquartered in Tokyo, but we have two offices in Germany. We're in Berlin and Munich. We have about 200 people around the world, representing about 20 different nationalities and just as many languages, and that's in Europe alone. We're a team of strategists, UX, UI designers, and developers. In addition to building products, we also work with our clients to build the important ecosystems that surround innovation and digitalization. Organizational design, brand experience design, all of the good stuff. One announcement I would like to make is that in a couple of weeks, we'll be hosting a very special masterclass on how to facilitate remote user testings. We've had a lot of requests and questions about this lately, so we decided to make it a thing. This will be a 3-part masterclass on how to streamline and make your remote testings more efficient. Space is super limited, so if you're interested, I would highly recommend that you register as soon as possible. And we will also have this link in the chat. Also, of course, we're still doing Product Hour, and we love Product Hour. It's a free hour of feedback for anyone who needs feedback on their or a second pair of eyes on their digital product or service. All you have to do is sign up. It's completely free. We won't try to sell you anything, but if we do, it will be nice and subtle. Last but certainly not least, today we're very excited to be able to give away a free year of the Adobe Creative Cloud. Thank you, Adobe XD, for allowing us to do this. If you're a designer and you use Adobe CC, you know that it's about €600 a year. It's not cheap. All you have to do is go to LinkedIn, write a post, tag Goodpatch, and hashtag Product Crunch. We'll announce the winner at the end of the event. So to wrap things up, it would be remiss not to touch on what's happening in the US right now. I'll begin by saying on a personal note that as a Black American, it's amazing to see the huge show of support for the cause that's happening, not only in Berlin, in Europe, but across the world, really. I'm still processing everything that's happening. It's a situation that is evolving as we speak. So I'm just gonna take this opportunity to tell you that if you're feeling uncomfortable, welcome. Know that your discomfort is a positive first step. Like the lobster, if you never feel uncomfortable, there's no incentive to ever grow. So the most important thing we do right now is to educate ourselves and to keep the conversation going. It's important that we speak to each other gently and with compassion, that we inspire each other and continue to impress the issues that are holding us back as a society. To be silent is to be complicit. If you're in the US, vote. As a citizen, you have a significant amount of influence on your local and national representatives and policies. If you're in Europe, you can send emails, sign petitions, donate, share resources and initiatives online. It's more than a hashtag, it's more than a black square. Today, we're collecting donations for the Bail Project, which is perhaps one of the more immediate ways that we can support the protesters who are in jail. We've been sharing the link also in the Twitch chat, but of course, there are a number of organizations that can use the additional financial support. Act Blue is also a very great, secure website that allows you to donate or split your donation to up to 39 different bail funds across the US. So we've also been sharing that link in our social channels. Finally, I would like to acknowledge that everyone has a different way of processing information. We process information at different times. We all have different financial limitations and situations. We all have varying levels of comfort. Some of us love to get out in the street and protest, and some of us don't, and that's absolutely 100% fine. There are a million ways to support the cause. Find the way that's most authentic to you and perhaps your line of work. Ultimately, we must ask ourselves 20 years from now, what do you want to say you were doing in June 2020? This is history in real time. Next week, when Instagram has returned to its regularly scheduled programming, I hope you all hone the energy that has been created this week, and you invested into your own communities. The fight has only just begun, and it starts right here at home. So, in perhaps the best transition in the history of webinars, I'm happy to introduce the reason why we're all here today, and that is UX writing. It's one of those things that has many, many, many different names. If it's UX or UI writers, maybe you're a copywriter, you're a content strategist, you're a micro copywriter, but whatever you want to call it, UX writing is very, very important, and it's the bridge between the visual layout and the usability, between the product and its users. We're going to have an exciting hour ahead, maybe hour and 15, 20 minutes, thanks to my epic fail today. But we're joined by 3 amazing speakers who are all content pros and write UX copy for a living. We'll be doing Q&A after each talk, so please write any questions you have into the chat, and you can do that proactively. So without further ado, it brings me great pleasure to introduce our very first guest. And Nicole is an independent content strategist and writer. She's based in Stockholm, Sweden, where she works as a freelance UX writer for Spotify. Her unique background in engineering and marketing, coupled with her lifelong passion for writing, make her especially well suited at the intersection of content and design. So please welcome Nicole. Nicole.
Hi, everyone. I hope everyone can hear me. I'm going to share my screen and get started. So first of all, it feels a bit weird to talk about UX writing this week because it feels like we have much more important things to talk about right now. But this was scheduled, and this is also important for some of you that may be working as designers or with designers and are thinking about improving user experiences. And actually, I think UX writing can do a lot for inclusion and accessibility as well. So that's kind of what my talk is focused on now. And I'm going to try to keep it short. I want to keep it to about 15 minutes, which is difficult for me because I do actually teach content strategy and UX writing. And my sessions are normally much longer and pretty workshopy. So I've kind of copy pasted parts of them together to be able to give you a lot of value in only a short amount of time. Really briefly about me, Maya already introduced me really well. I'm currently working for Spotify, where I write UX copy for the platform experiences. And without further ado, let's get started for how you should think about UX writing as designers, or maybe how you can start getting into UX writing. And the first thing I want to talk about is really what is UX writing. And I feel like there's a lot of opinions about that on the net. Oftentimes you actually read something like, oh, UX writing is totally different from copywriting. It's two completely different things. And this is actually something I don't really believe. Personally, I believe that UX writing is the marriage of the two disciplines of user-centered design and traditional copywriting. I think it's still a lot about persuasion, maybe not necessarily for users to buy something from you all the time, which is often at the center of copywriting, but definitely you still want users to do something. And there's some persuasion that goes into that. So this is how I define it. And that is kind of the foundation of a lot of the things that I'm going to be talking about today. So if we look at it like this is something that I pulled from the UX Writing Hub, which is, by the way, a great resource with a lot of free things that you may want to look at if you want to learn more about UX writing. And they say that UX writing sits somewhere in between user research, and this is definitely a good overview to keep in mind, that a lot of UX writing is about research. A UX writer, and this is of course very different from a copywriter and many other writers, is not paid per word. It's quite the opposite. The more simple you can make things, the less words you can use to get something across, the better. And in order to do that, you need to have a really good understanding of the research behind everything and both design and the overall strategy that you want to get across with your writing. So what are UX writers actually for? And now this is a bit angled from a designer perspective. So I think UX writers are very important because they bring a lot of attention to details. As a UX writer, when I'm onboarded to a project, I will ask a lot of questions that oftentimes you as a designer may not even have considered yet, or that maybe hasn't surfaced yet, because the approach for a UX writer to go into content designing a flow is usually a bit different from the way a designer would go on it. We look a bit more at context and we try to pull in other things that may be in different parts of the product. If this is, let's say, an app, have already been said and used, and we really try to combine that, and that enables us to pay much more attention to details. And by setting a content strategy and sticking to that, it becomes easier for us to really make sure that there is consistency and that the text and the content we have is relevant. And at the same time, this, of course, can help simplify flows and, of course, make interactions more human. And this is, I think, something that is often not talked about when it comes to UX writing, how the tonality of your writing, the copy you put there, it makes a huge impact on the brand. Like, you can have the nicest designed app or service or website or whatever it is you're working on. If the copy, the writing is not in line with this, it can ruin the entire experience. And it's really about trying to use words and phrases that are very conversational and casual. Of course, some apps don't have that kind of tonality, but they should always feel real and relevant. And this is something where UX writers can really, really come in and help with that. Then, of course, tied together with the consistency, we can often come in and help you craft a narrative that really ties different flows together. So of course, what often happens in big companies is that there's a lot of designers working on a lot of different parts of the product, and they're very focused on their specific part, and very seldomly do they actually come together and look at, hey, how does this actually tie together? Are we all talking about the same thing? Are we telling the same story? And UX writers are often very, very good at doing this. And this is, for example, also something that I've been doing a lot at Spotify to ensure that, hey, across different product areas, are we really saying the same thing? How do we align the things that we're putting out there? And then, of course, also connecting to the interaction, making interactions more human, is that we can bring in a lot of personality that is aligned with your brand. And this can be actually very, very helpful for when your product or service is maybe taken out of context of your design. So let's say somebody is just taking out the text, but not the design that you made. Then if you're really good at adding personality to your writing, people or users will still be able to recognize your brand just from the copy. This is, of course, the ideal case scenario, and it's difficult to get there, but a lot of consistency can get you there, and it's really nice. And I think some of the most famous examples we have of great UX writing, for example, Headspace or maybe even MailChimp, they're famous because they have managed to develop a personality in their writing that is so distinct that it really carries the brand even beyond visuals. Then, of course, UX writing can really help you increase accessibility. Not everybody understands each button, but the writing can make it very clear. And last but not least, and for me as a freelancer, this, of course, is often where I'm brought in. A bunch of flows have been designed, a lot of money has been spent, and then users aren't understanding what's going on. So then it can often be cheaper to bring a UX writer in to really try to fix the existing flows rather than restarting the entire design process and changing everything that has been done so far. So this is often a way that, unfortunately, especially smaller companies still look as UX writing as like the last resort to, okay, like we've designed something, people don't understand it, a UX writer can fix it. And while we can often fix small problems quite quickly, it's, of course, not the ideal approach to UX writing, which brings me to my next slide. When should you bring in a UX writer? Let's say you're in the design process. Well, the short answer is now. The earlier you can bring in a UX writer, the better. Because even when you're just thinking about what kind of flow should we design, a UX writer can already help you with the research. They can help you with looking at different contexts, with developing a shared narrative between other flows. It can be really valuable to bring in a UX writer early on, and in the long run, it will save you a lot of work and a lot of redesigning. And I think one of the most important things that I would love for you to take away from this talk is that the earlier, even in your very early stage mock-ups of flows, let's say maybe you're just sketching with a pen and paper, if you can write an actual copy, the better. Because so often, even very late in the design process, there's still lorem ipsum, there's still blanks, there's still irrelevant copy. And oftentimes we think, hey, well, we can just fix the copy last, like it's not going to matter. It does matter a lot. Oftentimes when you bring in the copy early on, you'll be able to see, hey, we can maybe skip an entire frame here, or we will need an extra frame because there's some additional context your frames look. So the earlier you can bring in a writer, the earlier you can work with actual copy, the better for you and the better for the brand. So why, though, should we really care about UX writing? So what I've talked about before kind of introduces that a little bit with all the benefits that a UX writer brings. But of course, there's also very practical, measurable implications to this. And I just added 2 examples here. And the first one is just a random example, basically up next, keep track of upcoming due dates, mentions, and tasks, versus up next, here are all the upcoming due dates, mentions, and tasks. Gotta dismiss this. So these look very similar at first glance, but the fact is that the first one is much more actionable, it's very active, and it has a much higher engagement and conversion rate. The difference between these two is 20% in engagement for the first one rather than the second one. A small tweak, something that maybe if you're not actively looking for it, you wouldn't even notice. But if your app carries a lot of these passive messages that are maybe not very clear, you may be losing out on a lot of engagement. And on the right-hand side, we have an example from Google's hotel search, where originally they had book a room. I mean, sounds pretty clear to me, but then they did some testing and they ended up changing that headline to check availability. And that small change increased engagement by 17%, which is a lot. And I chose these examples that are not specifically clear at, okay, like, of course, this message is 10 times better than the other message, because I would like you to take away that oftentimes it's very small, minor things that you may be changing that you may not be aware of, that a UX writer can come in and this may seem clear to you. I think we should test something else. And it also really argues for A/B testing UX copy, because you may have a hypothesis and a very experienced senior UX writer may be able to already tell you, hey, this is probably going to work best here. But specifically, if you're starting out and you maybe have limited budget, it can be really helpful to test different parts of copy. And you would be surprised how small of a change can really boost your engagement and really elevate the user experience. So very quickly, to just give you something practical to take away from this talk as well, I do want to touch upon the fact that I truly believe UX copy is about persuasion. And the first principle of persuasion is clarity. It's all about creating user experience that are clear. People know what to click. People know what to expect. People know where they're going. And this is why I wanted to talk about 3 different principles of persuasion for if you're maybe as a designer, because there is no UX writer you can work with, asked to put in copy early on. And the number 1 principle is priming. So priming is when you use words or other cues to activate memory associations, which can then affect future actions. And it basically works like, you can think of your brain like a glossary, like Wikipedia. And let's say you see the word yellow, then it's going to be easier for your brain to recognize the word banana, because yellow and banana are associated and clearly linked in your brain. So priming in UX writing is a very useful thing to do when you want to eliminate friction in moments, for example, just before you ask a user to do something. And I have an example here. And this actually is Headspace. And you may recognize this actually from most apps you probably have on your phone. Eventually, they will ask you, hey, can we allow notifications, or can we track your location, whatever the message is. You get a lot of these messages. And the fact is that the message on the right, this is from an iPhone. That one you as a brand can often not impact because it's automatically sent from the system. However, you can create your own message on the left-hand side here that Headspace did and prime the user before they're asked this message, this automated message by Apple. And Headspace does this in a very nice way, right? So instead of just asking, we would like to send you notifications, allow or don't allow, they ask you, hey, need a gentle nudge? Enable notifications to receive reminders to help you on your Headspace journey. And then you can allow access or decide not to allow that. And of course, you have their nice little branded graphic there as well. And this is a very nice way to kind of already connect what's about to happen, which is a moment of friction, to their brand and the purpose. They basically remind you, hey, this is a gentle nudge, and this is there to help you on your personal Headspace journey. And this will make you much more likely to actually allow access. Then the second principle of persuasion is reciprocity. And what this does is that it basically says that people will pay you back if they have received something from you before. So the gist of it is essentially, if you give your user something valuable, they will repay you. And this could be just by like giving you access to something, pressing a button that you want them to press. It can be in a lot of very like zoomed out things, and it can also be very, very specific. And I have a bit more specific example here. This is Stella. And what Stella wants is essentially for you to share their service with your friends so they can gain exposure and more people can find jobs. But so instead of basically just saying, hey, please like send this to a friend, they say, invite your friends to try out Stella and we'll pay you up to $500 for each placement. So they very directly already say, hey, we're going to give you something. And that will make you more likely to maybe actually invite friends, because otherwise, if it's just, hey, refer us to a friend, you know how often we get asked this, we're not very likely to do this anymore. And of course, there's other ways that you can do this. You can give your user something before you ask something from your user. And last but not least, this one is a bit less known and you may not use it that often actually when you're writing UX copy, since that is something that is oftentimes also maybe part of the marketing team, but I definitely want to touch upon it. And this thing is the serial position effect. So this basically just means that items that are presented at the beginning or at the end of a list are more easily remembered than those in the middle. And before I theoretically talk about this, I'm going to show you a very clear example. And this is from Dropbox, where you're asked to choose your Dropbox plan. So Dropbox Plus, all your files on the go. The first one says automatically back up your camera roll to keep your photos and videos safe. The second point talks about the 1 terabyte storage you get. And then the third point says easily save, view, and share files on your phone and computer anywhere. And we can very clearly see here that most people will be able to relate to the statement that you can automatically back up your camera roll to keep your photos and videos safe. And they will also be able to very easily relate to easily save, view, and share files on your phone and computer anywhere. However, the actual amount of storage is likely something that isn't too important to people and that is not as easily relatable to. So this is why they position it in the middle here, because the first and the last point in this list is the more stronger point to help users convert to actually try this free trial. And that's essentially how the serial position effect works. So this was what I had for this talk. Sorry that I've been talking so quickly. I just really wanted to make it in time. I did, however, and I'm not sure if you're going to get the slides later, but I'm sure there's a way we can get these links to you. I wanted to include some links for you to easily read some more about UX writing. So there's a very nice video about creating kind content. I think this is very important today, this week, all the time, that you really also make this part of your UX writing practice. How do I actually write copy that is empathy driven? This is something that I'm very, very focused on, and I do this a lot with clients, and I really try to develop tonality that helps them develop copy that is meaningful and not just pushy and doesn't feel stressful. Then there's something on copy for small attention spans and how to develop voice and tone content guides and tonality guidelines. And then last but not least, there's the microcopy canvas, which is actually a great workshop tool. You can use it with your other colleagues, but you can also use it by yourself for when you first start ideating a flow to bring in different points that you may want to consider when you start thinking about the UX copy for that. And then that was it for me. If you want to learn more from me, I have a podcast called Content Rookie. You can find it everywhere. It's also on Spotify. And there I talk about all things content marketing, content strategy, copywriting, UX writing. And I'd love if you listen to it and maybe send me some feedback. So yeah, that's it for me today. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Nicole. Thank you so much, Nicole. I hope you can hear me. I hope you can hear me. Yeah, so thank you so much. If you have any questions, please drop them into the chat. Now is the time. I said this in the first introduction I gave that nobody heard. But again, Nicole was nice enough to join us. She's doing a workshop today, so she's spending her lunch hour with us. So unfortunately, right after this, she has to skedaddle. So make sure if you have any questions, you ask them now before it's too late. I guess just to kick things off, I have one question, which is like with UX writing and a lot of brands now, they're always trying to be funny in some way. And sometimes humor is not read well, or they don't do it correctly. So like, what is your approach with like humor when your clients are telling you, hey, we want to be like funny, like Arby's on Twitter?
Yeah, I think it's a very good question. It's a very challenging topic. I think a lot of brands don't understand how complicated it is to even be perceived as funny, even just in one language. I mean, so much can go wrong there. And then, of course, like you say, it doesn't translate very well. So it's usually something I'll include in my research. If I am involved in actually developing the tonality, I will, of course, ask, hey, what markets are you focused on now, but also in the future? And then this is part of the research that I do before I suggest, okay, like I think your tonality should be very, let's say, credible if it's a bank or a fintech. Or, hey, we can afford to be a bit more funny and quirky here. And this is something that I bring into it. But definitely, it's not something I would generally recommend. I think another good example of this is, for example, that was very bad UX writing, Lee said, is that a lot of companies, they apologize all the time, right? Like there's a page that you can find and it's like a big apology, something doesn't work and everything is like, oh, we're sorry, we apologize. And actually, this is something that also doesn't translate very well into all cultures. And there are ways to think about this in regards to what is the friction moment. Is this something where it's appropriate for me to apologize? Is this something where it's okay for me to be funny? Probably not. And if you start zooming out and thinking about things like that, then it can help you decide how your tonality should really be there.
Yeah, so true. The locality is key, right? Even like cultures, subcultures, even like, I write a lot of content for Good Patch, and so many times I'll use some references and nobody knows what the heck I'm talking about. So that's always good to keep in mind. Let's see, here's a question. It says, how do you cope with the consistency of different languages in Spotify in terms of tones?
So of course, we have all our UX writers are native English speakers so far, and then we just work internally with translators. And then this is actually a big problem, and I honestly think that most companies face this problem. We of course can't really check how well the tonality translates, but you will notice when you're using Spotify that it actually doesn't have a very strong tonality focus. The main focus at Spotify really is we want this to be as clear and as simple as possible. And the bigger issue we have with translations is that sometimes things just become so long in Russian, or actually in German as well. I am bilingual, so I also speak German. So for me, it's quite easy to write something in English and then like just do the test. Okay, what would this be in German? And then I realized, like this is going to be such a long button. So it's a real struggle, and we focus a lot on really shortening that. And you may have noticed this as well, that we're taking away more and more buttons that actually have text on them to actually avoid this.
Mm-hmm. So let's see, maybe we take one more question and sensitivity of your time. Let's see, how to pander to global audience when cultural contexts are so diverse, like a catchphrase or a brand line. It's a good question. I noticed that here in Germany, walking around, there's like an English tagline in the front of a store.
I think it's very important that if you have the resources, you should definitely have a localization team that can at least throw an eye on it and make sure that it's pop culture relevant. And big companies like Spotify, of course, that is possible. But a lot of the smaller companies I work with, let's say they want to sell in the UK and in Sweden and in Germany. I mean, those are three very different cultures. Then, to be honest, my main recommendation usually is we should stick to only the parts of our brand that can really translate into all these cultures without offending someone or without requiring context that those people may not have. So you really have to kind of dumb it down, and then it works in the beginning. And the more you build on it, well, the more you're actually going to have to invest in localization. I think we shouldn't kid ourselves that localization with any kind of text is easy. So it's the same for UX writing, and even certain user experience, and this may even move away from UX writing and be part of the design flow. Maybe things should be designed different for different cultures because they're just used to different products and they're used to using things in a different way. So it's actually a much, much bigger question than just text and writing could fix.
Mm-hmm. You're great. So thank you so much again for spending your lunch hour with us today. Let's give it up one more time for Nicole. And yeah, have a great rest of your day. I would just like to say really quickly to everyone hating on me being muted, okay, I'd like to see you guys do a webinar. Especially this You Do 63, okay? I was being professional, had everything turned off, but anyway, it's all in good fun here. So thank you again, Nicole.
Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. So our next speaker is Joleen Lee. She's the first and only UX writer at Foodora. She's worked across Europe, North America, and has had a range of experience that we can only imagine has had a profound contribution on her ability to empathize and communicate with her users. So please welcome Joleen.
Hi. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, great. I hope you can see me too. Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm really happy to be here. So today I'm going to be talking about how we could create more value as a UX writer. So, it's a relatively new field in the industry. We have to constantly prove ourselves. We have to always show our value, show that we can add value to design projects. So how can we do that? So I would just like to start off by saying that a lot of my examples today are going to be more about food delivery and consumer products because that's what I'm currently working on. But really, the framework that I'm going to give you today applies to any products. Like, in fact, it doesn't even have to be about products. It would be designing an experience. You can apply this framework as well. So I think we need to have more conversations about going beyond words, going beyond just working on the copy. And how do we do that is by building a content approach. But first of all, to get everyone on the same page, I also would like to define what is UX writing. So because we have so many job titles now, some people are called content designers, UX copywriters, content strategists. So like, what's the difference and what is it really? But this is what I define for myself. To me, UX writing is about using content to make products more usable for a better experience. So there's quite a few things to unpack here, so let's break it down. What do I mean by content? Content, the first half of it is the information architecture. So that consists of the content hierarchy and the structure. And the other half, of course, is the copy, and which are the message angles and phrasing. So what we want to do is to use content to make something more usable to give a better experience. And by more usable and better experience, I mean the product is easy to use or easy to understand. And even if it's not easy to use, we're making complex features intuitive. And we also engage by being relevant to the user's mental models. And we use content to build trust by being transparent and consistent. And great content also helps us to stand out from the competition because it improves the overall experience. But so far, what I've been talking about is just the deliverables and the impact. How can we get to these deliverables that produces this kind of impact? What's in between? What's the process like? And I know that for UX writers, we have many challenges. We aspire to do many things, like to contribute to the end-to-end process, to get a seat at the design or a product table. We want to solve problems instead of putting a band-aid on things. And we want to get involved early. We're always asking people to, invite us to meetings. And we want to create more value and show it, increase our visibility on our work. But how exactly can we do that? So one way that could help us achieve these is by having a solid content approach. This would help us build more user-centric products. It helps us to come up with strategic content decisions for the long term, and to also put our work in front of stakeholders to get our buy-in, and also to make sure that people know that we exist in the company. And so I'm going to go through 6 steps on how we can build a content approach. So first of all, we need to identify the problem. So that sounds really easy, but most of the time, actually, it's not so straightforward. So I'm going to show you a dialogue, and you see if you can relate to this. So your product manager comes to you and say, could you make the copy sound better? And you're like, sure, I'll be happy to. Great, so we want users to complete their orders faster. If they check out within 10 minutes, we give them 100 reward points. And we need your help to hype up on 100 points in the message. Do we know what's holding them up? So part of being a UX writer is about asking the right questions. And even though the product manager wants users to complete their orders faster so that they increase the sales, And then he wants to do it by using some incentives in the form of points to motivate users. But is this really what motivates them? Like, should we look into problems that's, holding them up? Should we look at what's blocking them, what's delaying them from checking out faster? So sometimes the solution that are handed to you may not be the best. In fact, the problem that people tell you may not even be the root cause of the problem. What we need to do as UX writers is to dig deep and to find a real problem. Then we ideate and explore solutions. So next, after we identify the problem, we need to align on the goals and constraints. So let's see if you find this scenario familiar as well. So business comes to you and say, we're targeting a 10% sales increase this quarter. And the product manager wants to achieve this goal by increasing the conversion rate. He thinks that's the way to achieve 10% increase. The designers say, you know what? Actually, the entire checkout flow is broken. We should just redesign the whole thing. But we don't have enough time, so we just use points for now. Then you go to the engineer to talk about what's possible and what. Actually, we can't award points right after checkout. That will only happen when the delivery is complete. And after you have all these internal stakeholder, internal interviews, you decide to look externally and talk to the users yourself. And you found that what's holding users up is that they find it so hard to change their delivery address and they're spending so much time there. So as UX writers, we have the opportunity to get everyone on the same page, prioritize the goals. Many people have different goals, prioritize them, work around the constraints, work with what you have, work with the resources you have, whether that's manpower or time or research resources. Just work with what you have, but you need to have a proper plan to prioritize these goals. So once you have that plan, don't just stop there. Don't just build for MVP. Don't just build for the current version. Also propose a vision for the future. What would you like to see if it was up to you? Work with the designer and your product manager to build a roadmap to get to that ideal version. So next, after we have looked internally, we need to dive deep into the user's thought process. We need to understand their mental models. And first, how we're going to do that is by gathering all the questions that they might have in a particular journey, user journey. So these are all the questions you've gathered. Then you put them in order by arranging them according to which questions they ask first, so that you can address these questions in sequence. There are many tools out there for mapping user journey. You can use the empathy map to know what the users are thinking, feeling, doing, and saying in this particular journey. So you'll be surprised that sometimes these four elements may contradict. So it's best to hear from the users themselves. Another method is after you have mapped the journey, you need to map the individual touch points. This is a method that I use very frequently. So I gather all the touch points, and then with each touch point, I break it down into what are the users thinking and feeling at that moment. And what do we want them to think and feel? And how do we make them go from thinking and feeling that to what we want them to think and feel? So next, we establish the content principles. So these content principles, I'm referring to guiding principles that are specific to the feature or component or objective. One example of being specific to the objective is to have all error messages include a call to action or a helpful tip. Another way you can do it is by creating a concept for the particular feature. Like for example, instead of offering multiple payment services, we roll them into one and present it as an express checkout option. So I'll be curious to know if you've ever developed a content concept or communication concept, and how did it work out for you? So next, we define the tone. So at this point, I just like to highlight that the tone is different from the brand voice. The brand voice is, it doesn't change very much. It's tied to the personality, but the tone is situational and changes according to the context. But still, it has to be consistent to the overarching brand voice. So to define the brand voice, we need to ask ourselves what kind of relationship we want to foster with our users. Are we talking to them like they're a friend, or maybe they're a coworker, or a client, or parent? All these different types of relationships are completely different from each other. And if we are talking to a friend, how would you explain that feature? How would you talk to them in that situation? Or better yet, imagine how they would talk to you in that situation. Because as UX writers, we are often, caught up and distracted by language commonly used by companies, like for example, get priority delivery as a member. But what does it really mean for the layman? Does it mean that they get their orders faster? Does it mean, they get to cut the line, get to be first? Or would the driver turn back to get their order? What does it really mean? So this also helps us to build trust by being more transparent in what we say. So after we know what we want to sound like, we also want to set boundaries by, defining what we don't want to sound like. So other than what we don't want to sound like, we also, maybe a better way to look at it is to think about what kind of impression do we not want to give. Like we wouldn't, if our boss asks us how's a project coming along, we wouldn't be going like, oh, it's terrible. I have no idea what I'm saying. This just gives that wrong impression. Okay. Okay, so finally, we put all these steps together and show our work in our deliverables. But we should always show our work in the actual script, in the actual products. Is what the business side, what the marketing side and product managers are going to see are what's on the screens, what's in the product. They're not going to refer to your Google Sheet. I used to use Google Sheet back at Grab in those days. Yeah, I know of several companies that use the same tool as well. And while the Google Sheets are really good for organizing and documenting, it's not a good visual, tool to explain our work. So most people are, visual learners. They need to see something to in order to understand. So we need to present it in a way that people can understand. So show your work, get on the tools that the designers are using. If they're using Sketch, get on Sketch. If you're using Figma, all the better. You can collaborate at the same time. And if they're using other tools, go learn it. UX writers are really co-designers, so we should be able to use design tools as well. So get in front of people. When you have you have your deliverables in the actual screens, you can easily pull them out, put it in a deck, and easily anytime you have the opportunity to, or print it out and paste it somewhere in your office, and people walk by, they can see your work. So other than showing your work, that's not enough. We have to also explain your process. So not just showing the before and after. I know that's a very popular way of showing our work, but to explain our process is to explain how did we get to our deliverables. Yeah, so as I mentioned, put it in your deck, show your content approach. This is where your content approach comes in. Show the steps you took, the research that you invested in, and how do you arrive at your final product. So this helps you so much to get buy-in from stakeholders, because when they understand why you make certain decisions, it's much, much easier to persuade them. And they might even see you in a different light and give you a seat at the table. So I just like to close with this metaphoric hole. So many times when there's a hole, we are told to work on the copy to plug that hole, only to realize that hole is just part of a bigger problem. What we really need is to work on the blueprint to design something better. And so today, whether you are already a UX writer or you want to introduce UX writing to your company, I hope that all of us will aim towards working on that blueprint that helps us to design better products. Thank you.
Thank you, Jolene. That was great. That was great. I especially like to the end. It's so true. I mean, isn't that common across? Isn't that common across? So many industries and jobs and so many of our roles where there's a problem that we identify. We think we've identified the problem, but actually it's much, much bigger than that. So as people start to write their questions, here we have one already. Someone would love to know, in your opinion or experience, what are some research UX writers can do to back up the microcopy that they want to use in the UI? So I guess it's, what research can you do to support your decisions?
That's a really big topic, and I actually have a whole other presentation for that. But to build your content approach, I think you need to do a lot of foundational research, like understanding your users. What are their motivations? What are their habits? What are their mental models? What are their expectations? So these are more foundational research before you actually work on like a prototype. So after you have these foundational knowledge, you work on the product, you can build a prototype and test out and validate your hypothesis. So that's another kind of research, is validating your hypothesis. So it really depends on what your research objectives are. Like, what questions do you have? What do you want to find out? And if your company has a research team or researcher, great, you can get their recommendation on what research method is best for answering your questions. If you don't have a big team without a research team, there are so many resources online. You can easily do a quick Google and find out all the research methods that are useful for different objectives.
Mm-hmm. And one question someone had for Nicole, but I think you might also be able to answer, is how does SEO play a role in your general strategy, if at all?
SEO? Well, so I assume you're talking about working on websites. So, well, SEO now, in my opinion, I think keywords play a very small role right now. Like, I used to do content marketing, so back in the day, it was all about like pumping in keywords, going on Google AdWords to see what are the trending keywords. But right now, even recently, Google is actually gonna boost websites that have better UX. So it's really about, instead of keywords, focus on the relevance of your content. Focus on what users care about, what would meet users' needs, what would motivate them.
Mm-hmm. That's fascinating, actually, that Google will start to focus more on UX now. That's a huge game changer. So let's see. Are there any other questions? Last chance for anyone that has one.
I would like to know from the audience about what they think about, going beyond words and building a content approach. Not just working on the final copy, but being like a co-designer and going through the whole design process to get to the copy. So I'll be curious to know what people think about that.
Yeah. Well, you can write it in the comments, and we can maybe by the end of the event today, we can sort of talk through what people post about it. Just really quickly, and I'm sorry to keep you hanging out on the screen, Jolene, but just a couple of things. So as Monica posted in the chat, Shaleah would love to know what nationalities are listening right now. So if you don't mind posting your nationality, I see that we have some people, of course, from Germany. Shout out Sarah Metcalf, a fellow American. People are from Spain, Italy. So the other thing is that if you haven't yet and you're still interested, we've been sharing this Streamlabs link that you can donate to support the bail funds for protesters in the U.S. who are currently in jail. And it's still not too late to win a free year of Adobe Creative Suite. So make sure that you go on LinkedIn, @GoodPatch, #ProductCrunch. It's a small thing to ask for a 600 euro prize. So with that, thank you so much, Jolene, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So we're going to bring you back at the end, but so we're finally going to introduce our final speaker, Shaleah Dawnyel. She leads the English content design at Taxfix, which reminds me that I have to pay my taxes. Nobody wants to do that. But something that we have in common is that we're both from Los Angeles. She's been in Berlin for almost 11 years, which is wild. And she works with entrepreneurs to build authentic brands through optimized content and believes that UX writing has the power to transform the way we tell stories. I agree. So please welcome Shaleah.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for that warm welcome. I really appreciate it. And I did not know that we were both from Los Angeles, so I'm learning a lot of new things right now. And also thank you for your introduction about what's going on in the US at the moment, because I would just like to say that I have rewritten this presentation I think 4 different times this week. So when I was originally asked, it was, it was a whole world ago. It was a few weeks. When Monica came to me, I was really excited to present about UX content design and content strategy. And I started writing a speech right away, and obviously we're in a very ever-moving situation in the world right now where everything's changing all the time. So it started being the kind of thing where I was almost editing this daily. So I would just like you to all bear with me here, because I'm going to take you on a slightly different journey than has been presented so far. But I did take some notes actually from the other presentations. Nicole's presentation, bringing UX content writers in early is key, so important. Wanted to just do a big shout out for that. And also in Jolene's presentation, the stakeholders cartoon, that was awesome. I've been through that so many times. So yeah, so I'm actually not controlling my own presentation. So let's just start out with the first slide. There we go. Okay. So as I mentioned, I'm originally from Los Angeles, so born and raised in sunny Southern California. And I am a content designer by trade, but I'm a bridge builder by nature. And I will explain that a little bit more in detail. I'm African-American, Cherokee Indian, English, Irish, and Dutch. So I was raised in a really diverse cultural environment. And as a result of that, and also, my personality, I think I've always been really interested in bridge building. I've always been really interested in basically the translation of concepts and ideas and feelings and helping people understand themselves and understand each other better. So I wanted to show you a drawing that I made a lot when I was a kid. This is that drawing. Please bear with me. Obviously, I'm not an actual designer, and apparently someone's trying to deliver mail, so that always happens when you're presenting. So yeah, I used to draw this picture all the time when I was a kid, and I would give it to everybody that would come to our house. And so really simple design. We've got the two different sides of a mountain. We've got a bridge joining it in the middle. We've got some waters that may or may not be friendly down below, and the sun was pretty much always shining. So, okay, next slide. So fast forward a little bit of time. I came to Berlin in 2009, and all of a sudden I was 6,000 miles away from my birthplace, in a place that didn't even use miles as measurement. So this was an incredibly humbling experience for me, because suddenly I didn't know how tall I was, I didn't know how much I weighed, I didn't know how much beer fit in a glass, I didn't know what my shoe size was. And for the first time ever, even though I've always been interested in culture, I've always been interested in communication, all of a sudden it wasn't just down to words, it was down to being understood. So that sort of transforming my ability to read between the lines, to try to gain context in various situations, and to try to put things together in meaningful ways in order to somehow manage to combine what was going on in my head with what was going on in the heads of the people around me. I chose this graphic. I'm a donut. I'm not sure if you are familiar with John F. Kennedy's speech, Ich bin ein Berliner, but there's also Eddie Izzard has a really hilarious video about Ich bin ein Berliner actually meaning I am a donut. So I think it's just a good example of misconceptions that can happen when you are literally translating something, but the meaning isn't necessarily coming through. So next slide. So over time, I came to understand that very little of what I was doing. So I came here and basically had to figure out what I was going to do in English. I'd had a lot of different jobs before, and I have worked as a content writer, but also a strategic consultant, as Maya mentioned, for small businesses for many years now. And I had to figure out how to bring it all together, but what I realized quickly was that it had very little to do with the words. So I think this has been mentioned by our other presenters, that saying it simply is the only way to say it. It is usually, we have limitations of character count, we have limitations of screen size, we want to be as clear as possible as we can, we want to say the most that we can in the smallest amount of space. So the words that we're writing are actually very little of what the job is. And so I did a presentation recently at Taxfix where we were kind of educating everybody in our company about what it is that content design is. And this was one of the big slides that we used to sort of explain that, you know, we've all heard that content is king, but I think context is king, or queen in this case, where I think that everything that goes into it, so all of the research, all of the background information that you need to know, you need to know how the users are feeling, you need to know where they're coming from, you need to know where they're going afterwards. There's so much information that you need before you can write a single word. And so context is really everything. The exciting thing about that is it means that all of our experiences belong. So it means everything we've been through, everything we've experienced, all the things we've done, we can actually bring together and use to channel and harness for the power of writing things in a more concise and a more powerful way. So next slide, please. But one important thing that I wanted to mention was storytelling. So there are whole workshops about storytelling. I could really talk about this for an hour, but I absolutely will not, because I know it's the end of the lunch, and yeah, I'll try to keep this short. But storytelling is obviously one of our oldest arts forms. It's one of our most rich cultural legacies. It's the way we share information. It's also, in recent days, obviously the way that we persuade people to do things. So I thought, wait, hold on, there's a new term that I just learned, serial position effect, that I learned from Nicole. And I thought this was interesting because I've always called it bookends, right? So this thing that happens at the beginning and this thing that happens at the end. Every story has a beginning and an end. And you really do remember how things start and how they end. So yeah, so thank you for that lesson. I know she's not here anymore. But yeah, storytelling is fundamentally important to the work that we do. I think as designers, as copywriters, as content designers, I think pretty much all of the jobs that are being represented in this room right now, it includes you, when I say that storytelling is an important part of our work. So there's lots of historical story. There's lots of people that have come throughout history that have done amazing storytelling. So everything from Jesus to Jane Austen, from Maya Angelou to Steve Jobs. I mean, there's a breadth of information and different things that people covered. But the thing that brought them together was that they all told really compelling stories. Stories move people forward. Stories make people understand themselves and their worlds better. Okay, so next slide, please. So one thing that I thought was really interesting in coming to Taxfix was they were not hiring a copywriter. And I found that really fascinating because as Jolene mentioned, our discipline is sort of new. It's newly highlighted. I think she also said that we are constantly having to prove our worth, prove that it's, you know, actually financially viable to have a UX content design writer, you know, designer, and to making this a priority is sort of a bit of a stretch. But at Taxfix, it was really nice because they weren't just hiring a copywriter to write marketing copy or ad copy. They Rebecca Coleman had decided that she wanted to have a content design department within the company. And so at first I was like, well, that's exciting because that seems like it might bring everything together. So it brings all the strategy, it brings all the all the different aspects of storytelling and context and the stakeholders and all the background that you have to really hold space for an end-to-end experience. That potential was really exciting to me. So I've sort of, I'm not going to define UX content writing because I think it's already been defined twice in this presentation. So all I'll say about this is that copywriting for me is the story that's being told and content design is the story that's being experienced. So again, my job as I see it is to hold space for the entire user experience end to end. And it's actually quite a bit to hold. Okay, next slide. Okay, so back to bridges. I really struggled with creating this presentation, as I said, not because I don't have a lot to say on all of these topics, but because I was really trying to find a way to say something important, say something that I cared about, say something that was unique to me that you couldn't just read online or watch some other kind of tutorial. So bringing this childhood photo was my offering of that. And for me, this represents all kinds of things. So this could represent an argument that you're having with your spouse, and you need to build a bridge. You need to try to mend what you're thinking with what they're thinking and get back on the same page. This could represent a product that we're trying to sell to a customer. They don't know that they need it, or they definitely need it, but they don't understand what it is, and we have to build a bridge and explain it to them. But this could also be a bridge that represents a changeover in understanding of how we do our work and what our role is in our work in the world. Next slide, please. So that brings me to the world. Obviously, we're in a complicated moment. Understatement. And I've vacillated between realizing, obviously, the situation that we're in. You know, we're in home office. This is a virtual conversation that we're all having. So I'm sort of speaking into a screen, into a vacuum, even though I know you're all there somehow. And yesterday, as I was refining my speech for the 4th or 5th time, I don't even know anymore, I was having a conversation with a friend who literally has, you know, curfews and has riots going on outside of her home. And I felt remiss not to bring up the fact that as innovators and as people that are very, very privileged, we're very, very privileged to be here. Just the fact that we're on this call. Just the fact that we're in comfortable spaces with internet, just the fact that we're able to do this means that we're very privileged. And I think part of activating that privilege is about tapping into the design skills that we all have. Next slide. So I was looking up the definition of design thinking, and there are so many of them. So I just chose something, again, that's very, very clear and very succinct, but I think it kind of sums it up for me anyway. I'm sure we could debate about this a lot. But if design thinking is creative problem solving, essentially, and that requires coming up with new ways of looking at things, new ways of communicating things, new ways of approaching things. How can we use our skills of empathy? How can we use our skills of problem solving? How can we use our skills of pixel perfect design and grammatically perfect writing and our ability to research what people really are thinking and feeling and channel that? Next slide. So I read this article, I think it was just 2 days ago, that Monica shared. It's a great article. If you get a chance to read it, it's definitely on LinkedIn. And it was by Harrison Wheeler. And I contacted him right away and I said, can I quote you in my presentation? I am trying to wrestle this thing and make it make sense and make it matter to me. I'm supposed to be talking about UX content design, which I'm usually very passionate about. But right now, I just feel like there's so much going on in the world. It has to be about more. And he said, oh my goodness, yes, please quote me. So the title of this, and I want to make sure to get it right, was called "The Design Community Must Not Stay Silent." And he was mentioning our core competencies of empathy and communication and problem solving. But he sort of asked us to ask ourselves and ask our organizations 3 questions, and I thought they were fundamentally important. So who are we designing for? That's something that we're so familiar with. I think we ask that, a million times a week. But who are we not designing for? And then the third question, which I thought was especially poignant in this moment, is what systems are in place that drive the decision making? So the decisions that we're making, the decisions our organizations are making, how can we uncover bias that is probably sitting just below the surface? How can we have uncomfortable conversations with ourselves and our friends? How can we bring to light things that need to be brought to light? And how can we open this up? Next slide. So basically my question is, how can we build a bridge between what we have right now and what we want as far as the world is concerned? I did this one in color because this is actually the way it usually looked, because obviously I was a kid. And usually there was a rainbow. And I think in this case, that represents I think it was at least 20 nationalities that Maya mentioned. And everybody's starting to say, we've got people from Italy and Spain and Germany and the US. We've got a whole bunch of different people here that are coming from different backgrounds with different strengths and different ideas and different experiences. How can we work together and also individually and harness this to do something positive in our world? Next slide. That's the final question. How can we design the world as we wish it to be? Next slide. Thank you.
Thank you. So everyone, give it up for Shaleah. Just for everyone who's wondering why she was saying next slide, it's because our puppet master, Monica Ray Scott, was helping us out and making sure that we had Shaleah's slides. So thank you, Monica, for your brilliant behind the scenes magic. But yeah, thank you, Shaleah, for sharing your deeply personal story. And I think it's so true how your experience really ties into your role as a UX writer. Like, how do you capture that empathy and make sure that you speak to all these different people in the work that you do? So we're going to take a couple questions. One question was, are there any distinct differences between the role of a user experience designer and a user experience writer?
Okay.
That's a big question.
I understand the question, but I'd love to try to answer it.
Yeah.
So I'm actually a content designer. And what that means is that I work on the content team in the design department under the product section at Taxfix. So I think what the question is the difference between a content designer. So maybe that's the literal designer who's actually making everything pixel perfect and controlling the images, as opposed to the content writer, which in that context, I guess, would be me. I'm not really sure. But maybe to just go broadly, and I don't know if we can zoom in and they can ask it a little differently, because I'd love to answer the question. Maybe to zoom out just a little bit. One of the things I was going to do in the presentation before I revised it for the 5th time was I was going to make huge, bold statements, really scary things. I was going to say copy is everything you read, design is everything you see, and content is everything you experience. Mm-hmm. Just to kind of disrupt and make everybody maybe a little bit upset. I think in some ways we are all content designers. We are all making experiences all the time, right? We're contributing to the creation of experiences. So whether you are drawing things or writing things or producing things or researching things or programming things, you are making stuff. So we are all doing that together. And I have no idea if I answered that question. Any way to check in with that person?
Yeah. It's okay. I think you answered a question that we had anyway, so I think we can move on. Another question is so someone says, I completely agree with the importance of storytelling and context. How do you convince the design team / product managers to give more importance, time, and budget to this topic, the pointers / ideas?
Yes, this is a really good question, and something that requires diligence and a little bit of determination. And I think for me, and I actually believe that this was already said, bringing content into the design process as early as possible is so fundamental. So the way that I have been illustrating that lately is basically through various things. So through different user testing, but also I have the unique position in my company that I'm the English content designer, right? So that's the internal language of our company, but it's also the language, it's going to be the second language of pretty much all of our products. And so creating English language resources and then showing like the impact that it makes, the sort of before and after. So it's not really an A/B test, but like designing processes that show efficacy is sort of building a case. I think I also just try to figure out what the motivations are of the individual project managers and try to figure out how to speak their language, so to speak. So try to figure out what their hot buttons are and the things that they're most focused on and the things that would make them feel as though they're accomplishing their goals. And then try to figure out a way to, again, translate as simply as possible how better content design can actually help with that. Mm-hmm. And how that is actually fundamental, because theoretically, if we're doing human-centered design, which a lot of people like to throw that around, and we're all about user experience, well, who's at the heart of that? Users. How are they interacting with us? Through pictures and language. So what are we saying to them? Mm-hmm. That matters. Yeah. The shortest answer I can give. It's a lot. Yeah. That one's really long.
That's great. So I think because we've held everyone online long enough, we can start to wrap it up. But thank you again, Shaleah, for your talk. Also, thank you, Jolene. Unfortunately, Nicole had to return to her workshop because it is a Wednesday afternoon after all. But again, so thank you to everyone that tuned in today. I apologize for the first 10 minutes where I was talking to myself. Believe me, it's the last thing I wanted to do is to talk to myself. But, you know, we're making this up as we go along. So thank you so much to the Product Crunch team. I mean, I'm supported here. You only see me, but there are many, many people behind the scenes. Alex and Felix who are holding down the tech end of things. Lissy, who was moderating the chat and who helped illustrate most of our banners. Felix was also deeply involved in the banner illustrations. Thank you, Monica, for being the puppet master behind the scenes and for leading this event, as you have so many others, and selecting our speakers, actually. So thank you, Monica, for that. And thank you to Good Patch, of course, for letting us have fun and put these events together. So just one more thank you to our speakers, Jolene and Shaleah, who are here with us, and Nicole, who left. We're going to have another product crunch July 1st, and we're still sort of deciding what exactly that theme might be. So if you have any ideas, feel free to let us know. If you have any questions about product crunch or anything at all, if you want to help me unmute my computer, you can send me an email. It's Maya, MAYA, @goodpatch.com. So with that, please remember to wash your hands. We're still in a pandemic. Do your homework, and yeah, I mean, there's no day like today to make a difference. So with that, I wish everyone an absolutely wonderful day.